But now, as part of the Scotland's History Project, Phil Cunningham's Grace Notes.
Hope, love, beauty and terror. Scotland's religious history has seen it all, accompanied by some of the most breathtaking music our nation has ever heard. My name's Phil Cunningham and I've been a professional musician since I was about 16. I see myself as more of a spiritual person than a religious person, but I am well aware of the power of religious music and I know how it can reach something deep within us. For thousands of years, music has been centre stage in our worship, almost holding up a mirror to our spiritual progress. But as times changed, pieces of music that were once the epitome of faith were rejected and outlawed, leaving a whole raft of musicians and composers to fall silent. But just how did this happen, and what is their musical legacy? Well, in these two films, that's exactly what I hope to get to the bottom of. I want to find out how Scotland's two great traditional faiths, Catholic and Protestant, have used music to express their beliefs and look to composers to help them experience the joy of faith. Pluscarden Abbey, near Elgin, a place where people live and worship according to ritual that's over 1,000 years old.
We're Benedictine monks. Music is slap central in our life. It's almost the heart of our spirituality, really. We rejoice in a tradition which goes back to the early centuries of the Church. We like to think our spirituality is really that of Scripture and the Fathers of the Church. So we pray the Scriptures, and we pray them together musically.
I'm here on the 9th of June, which is a very special day for the monks here at the Abbey. This is the Feast of St Columba, one of Scotland's earliest Christian pioneers. I've come here to listen to music which is sung only once a year and is dedicated to this important saint. Standing alongside early evangelists like St Ninian and St Mungo, Columba was a 6th century monk from Ireland who came to Scotland and converted the people of the West Coast. How important is St Columba as a figure in the life of a practicing Christian like yourself?
He was a great saint who came to this country at the end of the 6th century, established a centre of monastic culture and evangelization which lasted for centuries, brought the light of faith, and for us as monks, there he was a monk, he established a monastery. So we're in the same line of business that St Columba was, although he was a great saint and we're terrible sinners, but apart from that.
This wonderful music venerating St Columba is from the Inchcombe Antiphona, a manuscript written in the 13th century. It's what we call Gregorian chant or plain chant, simple, single-lined music with words in Latin.
We sing it as it was written then, exactly how they sang it, what exact pronunciation they use, obviously is lost, but we know the notes, we know the texts.
We have a modern-day transcription here. Could you break this down a little bit for me, just to let me see exactly what I'm looking at?
Sure. This is our reproduction of the Inchcombe Antiphona using a computer program, but we use exactly the same 4-line stave that the antiphona uses, the same notes. It's very easy to read Gregorian chant. Unlike 5-line music, there's no key signature. All you've got is just a little sign saying what do is, or C.
Yeah, the starting point.
That's the starting point. The notes are going in clusters, usually of 2 or 3, which we recognise, as falling off a log. Gregorian chant's sort of like Lego. You build blocks of it easily. It's very, very adaptable.
Single melody line is perfect for the services at Pluscarden. Everybody sings the same and it unites them as a group. But just how would a composer go about putting a piece of music like this together?
The composer of the Inchcombe Antiphona has taken texts from the life of Columba by St Adamnan and set them to music, using fairly stock sequences. So he starts off, this is De potens hic agonista pater Columba, Father Columba, this great champion of God, ex demonum expugnabat milia, wrestled with thousands of demons. That's the text. Yeah. And then he uses, from the cupboard as it were, De potens. So that's, I mean, you could sing Ave Maria, everybody knows that. And then he takes it off with a little ornament, Hic agonista pater Columba, Hic agonista pater Columba. And then we sing the song. Dixit Dominus Domino meo. It just reminds us that we're in the feast of St Columba as we're singing the song. That ancient music enables us to sing together and sing with beauty and with suppleness and movement and joy.
I mean, you're touching there on singing together. I mean, as a community, how often do you actually sing together in a day?
Rather a lot.
Listening to the monks singing and recreating this early Christian music is a huge privilege. Although I don't understand the Latin, it's plain to see how such powerful music can connect you to your belief. But what did the medieval performers get from music like this? And what more do we know about how it was performed originally? To find out, I'm off to the place where this music was probably written, an island in the Firth of Forth. We've just left South Queensferry and we're headed for the island of Inchcombe, the Iona of the East. Well, John, I'm delighted to finally be on Inchcombe, where an old friend, the Inchcombe Antiphona, was believed to have been written. And I say believed to have been written.
Yes, it was, almost certainly, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the chants in it are for St Columba, and this is Columba's Island, Inchcombe, so that's one good reason for locating it here. And the other is that there's a chant in there protesting at the incursions of the English, perennial problem, alas. But anyway, the English were incursioning, if that's the word, around about the middle of the 13th century. They describe these chants as plain chant, but actually they're anything but plain. They're the most beautiful shapes, and the poetry itself, which they're based on, is also very shapely. It's not all poetry, some of it is very ornate and beautiful prose, but the actual tunes themselves
quite
are
melodious.
oh yes, very melodious, and I would say that particularly so for these chants for St Columba.
But the songs would mainly be in unison, though, wouldn't they?
They would be, though you might have had somebody, say, humming a drone, you know, sort of underneath. And, of course, if some of the trainee monks would have been laddies and their voices mightn't have broken, so they would be an octave higher singing. So that would give a kind of a texture as well to the sound. But the other possibility is that they'd have accompanied with clarsach, the Celtic harp.
Do you think it was meditative?
Yes, to a degree. Some of it was meditative, but some of it is very joyous and expressive and outgoing, and it was communal. And a reaching out towards the heavenly regions and towards the saint. They're all envisaging the saint in their minds. They know his story.
Why do you think it is that the monks were singing their praises all the time rather than just speaking them.
Oh, come on, Phil. You're a musician, for God's sake. And music is, well, it's the beginning and end of everything as far as I'm concerned. It's my religion. But music occupies much more of your brain than speech does. Speech is a specialization of music. It's the music that gives it the full beauty, and it's the truly international language. It can go more or less any place. It's the world's best passport. And if you want a passport to heaven, oh, come on, forget everything else, let's have music.
Today, the wonderful abbey that housed this music is a tourist attraction, and the island is home to birdsong rather than chant. But the manuscript still survives. John believes that although it was written in the 13th century, it contains musical references from the saints' time. It's mind-blowing to think that generations of monks could have passed down tunes learned by heart or handed on precious manuscripts now lost in time. But if they did, it means the music I heard at Pluscarden could be the closest you get to the real sound of St Columba and his followers. I suppose that makes the Inchcombe antiphonor a kind of fascinating musical time capsule that points to a Christian culture over 1,500 years old. And what a difference 1500 years makes. From its early humble beginnings at the time of Columba, Christianity marched steadily across Scotland, so that by the 13th century it was arguably the strongest political and economic force in the land. Today, it's difficult to envisage a Scottish church quite so powerful, a nation steeped in such devotion. But when the antiphonor was written, it was a time of utter piety, of real devotion, when the mysteries of religion were evoked by shrines and saintly relics. It was also a time when it seemed like everybody and their granny were going on a pilgrimage. Now, Scotland is not exactly the first place that springs to mind when I think of pilgrimage, but throughout the Middle Ages, believe it or not, we were a top destination for pilgrims from all over. To find out more, I have a wee drive to the ends of the earth, our very own St Andrews. Coming into the city, the bare bones of St Andrew's Cathedral are scarcely visible today. But back when it was consecrated, this was the greatest building in medieval Scotland, perhaps encouraging new ornate music too. Back in medieval times, standard accommodation for the common man probably would have been a single-roomed clay dwelling, and they would have had just the most basic of furnishings. A stark contrast to the huge 100-foot-high cathedral, dripping with intricate stone carvings and decorated with the most beautiful, expensive stained glass. Nowadays, St Andrews is a magnet for golfers, but back then this was a gateway to heaven, every inn and every tavern home to excited travellers. Professor Robert Bartlett has promised to make a modern pilgrim of me and show me around. Professor Bartlett, when you say St Andrews to someone nowadays, more often than not they would think of golf or the university, but in actual fact, many moons ago this was a pretty important religious centre.
That's right, yes. St Andrews was a pilgrimage town. It was a centre of religious devotion for people coming from overseas, from England, from all over Scotland, because it was believed to contain, in the heart of it, in the heart of the cathedral, the relics of the Apostle St Andrew.
In the shape of what, bones or?
Well, relics are usually some remains, human remains, of someone who's deemed to be very saintly. In the case of St Andrew, we happen to know what they were. They were 3 fingers, a bit of the arm, a kneecap, and a bit of the skull. So these relics were believed to be physical remains of the Apostle Andrew.
It's a bizarre fascination that people had in those days, and to some extent still do have, with getting close to the relics of old saints. What is this fascination that the people have?
Well, it was a very, very widespread aspect of medieval and indeed later religion. The idea that the bones of holy people had some kind of supernatural power. There are literally thousands of these shrines all over Europe, and St Andrews is one of the most famous of them. And people came partly because they thought they would get some kind of spiritual benefit from being near, and also very frequently because they thought that they could get supernatural healing. And this is one of the things that's recorded in many, many of these accounts. People come to the relics, they pray for healing for some illness, and according to the accounts, very often receive it.
This is truly fascinating. I'm really looking forward to going up to the cathedral with you and having a wee look at where these relics used to be.
Right, let's do that.
Evidence of St Andrew's ancient history is everywhere. The town still has its medieval layout, basically built in a V shape with all roads converging at the cathedral. Wow, it's much bigger than I'd envisaged.
Well, this was the biggest building in medieval Scotland. Christian churches are organised on an east-west axis,
right,
and the eastern end is the more holy and sacred end. The western end is the side that points out to the world, the public face. And what we've just done is come through the great western processional door, which was the public face of the church. We've now come in to the nave, and here we would have had huge columns on either side, now disappeared, windows above us through which the light would be coming. And this was the area that was open to ordinary lay people. Beyond would be the choir, and this church, St Andrew's Cathedral, was also a monastery. It was served by Augustinian canons, who were just like monks. They were vowed to poverty, chastity and obedience. And their dwellings would be on the far side of this wall. They'd have a dormitory and a dining room where they would live their common life. And their main activity would be coming into this church to the choir and conducting a constant round of chants, psalms and hymns.
So it would be filled with music a lot of the time?
This place would be filled with music almost, well, perhaps almost 24 hours a day, because they had a very full schedule. They even had a thing called the night stairs, which is where they came down from their dormitory into the church in the middle of the night in order to conduct the late night services.
And I would imagine, I mean, in a building this size, it would have sounded incredible.
I think the acoustics would have been astonishing.
Wow. I presume this is us getting into the business end of the cathedral now.
This is the east end of the cathedral, the most sacred part. Right here, in fact, was the site of the high altar. And what was very common in cathedrals or big churches that had really important relics, sacred relics, was that they would be located immediately beyond the high altar, at the eastern extremity, the most sacred part of the church.
And were the pilgrims actually allowed to come back here?
The pilgrims got as close as they could to the shrine. In this case, they would have to come down the side of the high altar. In many churches, there's actually a thing called an ambulatory, which is a semicircular space that takes pilgrims in a flow round behind the altar to the relics and then beyond.
Medieval traffic control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the place where it's almost certain that the big shrine containing the bones of St Andrew's was located. The bones that gave this place its name and its reputation and brought the pilgrims from all over.
Singers and scribes developed increasingly ornate chants to fill this immense new place of worship, which attracted pilgrims from home and abroad. Perhaps they were lucky enough to hear this chant, Vir Perfecti, dedicated to St Andrew himself. This chant consists of only two words, Vir and Perfecti, meaning perfect man. But with their almost endlessly decorated syllables, if ever two words try to convey the holiness of our patron saint, these must be the ones. This incredible cathedral took a long time to make, over 150 years in fact. And it took so long to make that I actually passed through a couple of architectural periods. If you look behind me, you'll see the little rounded arches here of the early period, which eventually gave way to the more pointed arches of the Gothic era. Well, just what would a magnificent structure like this have brought to a musical performance? Sadly, St Andrew's Cathedral is now in ruins and it's not going to give us much information. But thankfully, Glasgow's cathedral has survived the times, and I'm hoping that it's going to give me a little bit more information about how music and architecture got together to enhance the whole worship experience. From the end of the 12th century, architects and stonemasons employed new techniques on a scale never seen before. Their ambition is epitomised in buildings like Glasgow Cathedral. Music developed as if to mirror the architecture of these great halls of worship. More decorative, more rich, it emphasised more clearly than ever the power and the glory of the Catholic Church. John, I cannot get over the size of this building. What kind of statement were they making to make something this big?
Well, they're out to impress. I mean, this for the average country hick coming in from the fields, coming in from the local parish church, which is very, very small, humble building, coming in here is seeing something really, for him, literally out of this world, I think.
Yeah, reminiscent of heaven.
Reminiscent is some idea or some intimation, some glimpse of heaven.
It must have been an advancement of architectural technology that allowed them to create this.
Oh yes, I mean, you're getting here to a height of over 70 feet from floor to the ceiling, and it's partly because of using these very tall Gothic arches, which means that you can get these sort of galleries, and at the upper level, this triforium gallery going round, the clear-story windows above. And again, with great windows at the sides of the aisles, lighting the nave.
Just as great windows let in eternal light, so chants were sung that reminded us of the ever after too. Simple plain chants were decorated with new melody, adding a dimension every bit as beautiful as these towering arches. Music began to encompass a kind of harmony, not new to us, but radically different to the medieval era. Beautiful though this part is, but this is a very simple part for the common man to be standing in the nave here. I believe that through the arch here, there's even more wonders to behold.
Oh yes, this becomes really something to see now.
John, this really is a far more opulent part of the church, isn't it?
Oh yes, I mean, this detail and so on is much more concentrated.
Yeah.
But this was, you see, this is the choir of the church. This was a part which was occupied and used by the canons of the church, of the cathedral, for their services.
And their services were clearly much grander than the ones which were being conducted in the nave.
Oh yes, well, what the nave was getting really was the Mass being done from altars at the edge, the east end of the nave. Here, of course, the canons were having the monastic services effectively. They were having 8 services as well as the Mass each day, all sung.
This grand choir rests on the spot where the bones of St Mungo, or St Kentigern as he was also known, are supposedly buried. This lively chant dedicated to him would have had special meaning sung in this place. Like most early saints, Kentigern is portrayed as a prolific miracle worker. This chant tells how he rescued a lost ring from the mouth of a salmon for a 6th century adulterous queen, Langorith of Strathclyde. I can only imagine that it would have been an incredible sound in a building with acoustics like this.
Oh yes, we were talking after about 20, 30 people singing, which is quite a lot of noise coming.
Yeah.
And the sound coming out into the aisles and being percolated out and back right through the whole cathedral, probably. How much the people in the nave were understanding of it, perhaps is a moot question, but they were certainly hearing it. They were getting an intimation. It's rather like hearing somebody singing from the next door room, but with the door open.
The birth of the Gothic cathedral was mirrored by the arrival of music almost as soaring as these walls themselves. It took faith and worship to a whole new exquisite level. Sung with interwoven voices and melodies, it was music in 3D. During the Middle Ages, religious music made giant leaps. One of the reasons we know so much about its progress is because of an extraordinary piece of musical archaeology, which I'm just about to lay my hands on. It's a medieval manuscript which was resident in Scotland until a book hunter tracked it down and brought it here to Lower Saxony over 400 years ago. So, after a long trek across Northern Europe, this wee book, which actually turned out to be of massive cultural importance, found itself here in Wolfenbüttel, a historic town in the heart of Germany. In academic circles, the manuscript is known rather blandly as W1, and its full name isn't much better: Codex 628 Helmstedt. A rather mundane title for a document that contains some of the most beautiful sacred music in the world. Paleographers, historical handwriting experts, date this manuscript to sometime around the 13th century. But because script was pretty samey back then, it's hard to be specific. When it comes to the Scottish connection, though, we get a little bit more of a helping hand. Dr. Heitzman, this is quite an important manuscript, isn't it?
This is one of our most important and famous manuscripts indeed, yes.
Is there a connection to Scotland within these pages?
Yes, there is one page with an entry which tells us this manuscript belongs to the monastery of St. Andrews in Scotland. And this is a very sure hint that the manuscript actually was in that library in the Middle Ages.
How did it come to be brought here in the first place?
It came here to Wolfenbüttel in the 16th century. It was part of a manuscript collection by a Protestant church historian, Flacius, who is very important for Protestant church history, and he collected a lot of manuscripts with historical sources from the Middle Ages.
When they came to get the manuscript, do you think that the manuscript was given freely, or would they have had to have a fight to get the manuscript?
Well, I can't tell you that. I hope that it was bought legally. Yeah. But Flacius, as a person, was a very difficult person, and it is said that he took many manuscripts from libraries with him without permission of the librarian or of the abbot or the monks.
I don't suppose it matters how he got his hands on it. The important thing is that he did, because there was a chance that it may have been destroyed in the Reformation.
Yes, this is a repository where many manuscripts have been rescued from destruction during the centuries.
Most of the music in W1 was written by French composers and shows that the majority of our worship during the Middle Ages was dominated by religious ideas coming out of Notre Dame in Paris. It was commonplace for the Bishop of St. Andrews to visit Paris, which was the seat of European learning, and bring back the latest religious ideas and practices, which included new developments in rhythm and harmony too. Often, in an amazing feat of memory, great swathes of music were learned by the scribes before being committed to parchment. Do we have any information about any of the scribes in particular that wrote the manuscript?
There is only one exact information, because one of the scribes wrote his name on one page of this manuscript. His name is Walter, and I can show you the page. We have no more information about this person. We don't know where he lived, where he did his job, and probably there were several scribes involved in the production of this book, but we can't say who they were. Here, the last line on this page, he writes, "Qui liber est scriptus Walterus sit benedictus." This book is finished, and Walter wrote it.
Very nice. Walter was here.
Walter was here.
Much of the W1 is dedicated to the Virgin Mary and shows how music was developing from single lines to more complex forms. Here's one of its pieces frequently sung in her honour.
So there it is. The piece of music we're listening to, believe it or not, is the birth of modern music. The use of those interwoven melody lines, they would grow in complexity and take us into a whole new world of song. I've been accompanied on this musical exploration by a group of singers specialising in early church music. I asked one of their musical directors, Rebecca Taverner, to talk me through the seismic shifts in music that we've heard so far. The composer in me is just dying to hear the singers take a section from this W1 composition, a multi-layered, or if you want to get technical about it, polyphonic piece, and show me how music like this developed from the early plain chant of Columba's time. Is there a simple way to strip this back and explain to me how the polyphony actually works?
Indeed there is. All of this music is based on plain song, although that doesn't immediately strike you when you hear it.
So plain song being the single line of the melody?
It is. It's always the lower line, and they call it the tenor, which comes from the Latin word to hold. It holds the tune. But what the composer's done is he's compressed and expanded some notes so that it can be given a rhythm. We can demonstrate by just taking one small section and singing it in more or less the original plain song rhythm. So that sounds quite free. It doesn't have any rhythm added to it.
Yeah, it's very floaty.
Indeed. But to make it fit, the composer stretches and then lengthens some notes. So what you get is this.
I see. So by putting it more into a strict time, presumably that's to give the next harmony line something to hold on to, right?
Well, the upper line is pure decoration. Yeah. It doesn't have any relationship to the chant. It just decorates and harmonizes. Yeah. And harmony in those days is that very sort of archaic, empty-sounding harmony based on the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. Should we just sing you that upper line on its own?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Very ornate.
It is. You can hear that the busyness in it, which is all about decoration and got nothing to do with the original chant. Would you like us to put the two together?
Yeah, let's hear how it ties together. It's beautiful. And through time, presumably, as they got better at polyphony, did they start to expand the number of voices that would be used?
Well, this is really the basis of most Western music that follows. Well, actually, this is already quite sophisticated. It began with just simple drones being added. By this point, we've already got to something pretty clever going on. But here we find a third, fourth parts being added, and then by the time we get to Robert Carver, of course, multiple parts.
And with a homegrown genius like Robert Carver, what multiple parts these would turn out to be. This is what the golden age of Scottish composition would sound like. A time when Catholicism had got worship down to a fine art, and when Carver, our first musical celebrity, took words from the Bible and translated them into music for a myriad of voices. Where music had been composed by anonymous monks, it would now be written by a band of named composers. They would write music that would appear not just in our cathedrals, but also in our royal chapels. Scotland was about to enter the Renaissance. James, we're here today in the beautifully preserved Chapel Royal in Stirling Castle. This was quite a significant building, wasn't it?
This is the building as it would have appeared in 1594, with one or two later developments. James VI built the building as we see it here, and then one or two of his successors decorated it and produced the lovely impression that we have here. The acoustic is particularly wonderful in the Chapel Royal, and it would have been the home of royal music at Stirling from the early 16th century, when James IV established it as the collegiate church for his Chapel Royal.
James IV, of course, was absolutely pivotal in the development of music in Scotland, wasn't he?
James IV was crucial, yes. The Stuarts were all very musical and all great patrons of the arts, and not just architecture but also music and poetry and so on. But James IV stands out, yes. I mean, he was the man who, as I say, established the Chapel Royal as a collegiate church, financed it, produced money for 16 canons to sing and 6 boy singers, and it opened up much of the repertoire that was going around at the time that could have been performed for him by these virtuoso singers.
James IV was a king with European ambition, and what better way to present yourself as a monarch with international stature than by commissioning music every bit as great as that heard on the continent? It seems incredible to me that we know very little about Robert Carver, perhaps the greatest composer of early Renaissance Scotland. Scholars can't agree on whether he worked at the Royal Chapel or was a gifted recluse at Scone Abbey. Sadly, there are no portraits and no biographies, just a few sheaves of music written in his hand. What everyone does agree on, though, is that they display some of the most virtuosic, intricate music Scotland had ever heard. This piece, O Bone Jesu, is one of Carver's greatest works. Originally a complex weave of 19 falling and rising parts, its words are like a personal prayer for James IV. It asks, Admitti me entrare regnum tuum, permit me to enter thy kingdom. James IV may have had a personal reason for asking this.
He was also a very devout man, wasn't he? And was there any kind of personal need for him to have these religious pieces commissioned?
Yes, there was a very private side to James as well, and we know he was a deeply penitent man. He was involved in a sort of slightly tangential way in the murder of his father, and in 1488, and he never really recovered from this. He was racked with guilt as a result of it, and we know that he, for example, wore a chain round his waist, a chain of iron links, to remind him of this terrible sin that he'd been part of, and each year a link was added to the chain as a way of penance.
In the year the 19th link was added to James's chain, Carver wrote this piece. Maybe that's why it's written in 19 parts, one voice for every year of penance.
During the Renaissance, the Scottish monarchy moved around between their various royal residences. Stirling, Linlithgow, Falkland, Edinburgh. Wherever they went, they took their musicians with them. It was kind of like touring Renaissance style. And that makes me wonder where musicians like me fit into all of this. So far, everything we've heard has been designed pretty much for the voice, but surely there's a place for instrumentalists in heaven too. It's great. Murray, I've learned a bit in this programme so far about where the human voice fitted into religious music in the church within a Scottish context. What about instrumentation? When and where did that begin to introduce itself?
Where instruments came into the church is a bit lost in the mist of history in Scotland, I think, but certainly in Europe, instruments like this symphony was being used for teaching plain chant. Yeah. And there's a picture of a little monk playing one of these. In fact, this is modelled on that picture in the York Psalter, which is in the Antiquarian Museum in Glasgow.
So tell me a little bit more about some of the instruments that we have here today that may have been used over the years. I'll take this from you.
Well, here's an instrument which is a cow horn, and it's a very primitive instrument, but it can make quite a gentle sound. Do you want me to play
Yes,
one?
please. It's a beautiful sound.
It's a nice sound, isn't it? Whether this kind of instrument would have been used in a church context is a bit dubious because it's made from an animal horn and therefore has some associations, I think, perhaps with the devil. In fact, there is an engraving by Dürer, I think it is, of death as a kind of skeletal figure playing one of these.
And then some other instruments you have behind the crumb horn.
Yes.
Is one. That's an interesting one because that uses a reed not unlike the Highland bagpipes.
This is a connection between these European instruments that flourished in England and Scotland and France and Germany, and the bagpipes, which also, of course, were known all over Europe. Do you want to go at this one?
Oh, dare I? It reminds me of many, yet none of the instruments I've ever seen in my life before.
It's impressive for a start, yeah.
They sound like a Robin Hood film. This is the kind of this instrument is the sound that a lot of people associate with medieval.
That's right. It's the crumb horn, and it has become very firmly associated in most people's minds with Henry VIII and that kind of period.
This instrument here is of interest to me. It looks somewhat familiar. Can you tell me what about it?
Well, the kind of organs which were used in churches were quite often portative organs, organs which were small enough to be carried around. Yeah. And this is a very small version of that.
Can I pick it up?
Please do, yes.
No, I
It's
can't
quite
pick it up,
heavy.
it's too heavy.
Yeah. There are pictures of angels playing these things, but you have to be quite a strong angel, I think, to hold it up. It's got 2 octaves, and the bellows you have to pump with one hand, so you only have one left to play with.
Yeah. Well, I was a church organist when I was a boy at Sunday school in the Mormon church. I was asked to quit when my interest in jazz chords became a bit too much to the fore. And I think the words used were, "This is supposed to be abide with me, not Georgia on my mind." Do you mind if I try
Please
it?
go ahead, yes.
So the bellows only work in one direction?
Yeah, that's right. You have to think of it a bit like singing. You've got to stop and take a breath every so often.
Okay, not the old souk blaw method of the accordion. Okay.
Not a jazz chord in sight.
Do you think I'll get my job back?
Who knows?
I think after that performance, maybe I should leave it to the professionals. This is a rare instrumental piece from the Renaissance written by a choir master from Aberdeen. It's actually not really a religious piece, but it's based on the first psalm and it's written in parts just like earlier choral works. The Renaissance was a flourishing period for the arts all over Europe. In Scotland, it was also a time when many of our great cities came into their own, a time of great scholarship. Universities were established and the first print run took place in Scotland. Up till this point, we had taken the blueprint for our church services from Europe, and most of our musical traditions were shaped by the continent too. What I'm wondering now is, was there anything particularly Scottish about the way we worshipped? I've come to Aberdeen University to see a book that I've heard has a more national agenda, the Aberdeen Breviary.
It's a book for shaping your private prayer and meditation, really. And the reason why it's so small is that you carried it about with you. In the Royal Charter, which James IV gave to the first printers, it's called a portus, and that's because you carried it about. It's portable.
This portable instruction manual actually kick-started printing in Scotland. It was the brainchild of the founder of Aberdeen University, royal advisor to the Stuarts, Bishop Elphinston. The bishop designed it specifically for worship in Scotland.
What is it that makes this breviary different from its counterparts?
It's customised for Scotland.
Right.
Elphinston has taken the structures and about 95% of the content that you get in any breviary anywhere in the world. And what he's done is to take out saints that aren't culted in Scotland at all. I mean, who would cult, St Kenelm, who's a saint of southern England? Well, you don't want him, so you heave Kenelm out. but you put Kentigern and Ninian and Columba, all these saints we associate with the Celtic Church. Well, they all go in. And the other thing that's remarkable about it is that it's in fact a great work of scholarship, because what he did was to go back to the medieval documents, things which are already old when he was writing this around 1500, but things which are hundreds of years old at that point. And it's all going in here. If it's St Ninian's Day, which is 16th September, you've actually got information about St Ninian, which doesn't survive anywhere else at all.
All in all, 55 Scottish saints got their image promoted in our new ecclesiastical calendar. It was a way of personalising worship and placing it geographically on our own doorstep.
With 55 brand new Saints' Days in the Scottish Diary, the students here at Aberdeen University had 55 brand new reasons to go to church. And this is where they came, currently being lovingly restored, King's Chapel.
I'm excited because this chapel has the oldest Renaissance choir stalls in the country, and they're about to reveal something very special about how religion was evolving in Scotland.
There's something very interesting about this choir, and it's not something that you see at first. I believe that the interesting parts are underneath the seats.
Yes, indeed. The whole construction of the choir is an absolutely beautiful jewel box, and every part of it almost has some extra meaning. And for a start, you have these seats which tip up, and they are called misericords. Misericord means mercy seat, and this is because the services were incredibly long and they were expected to stand throughout the services, but boxed in here you could just rest your bum on these little lips of the seat and bend your knees for a few minutes mercy rather than and still appear to be standing up. But the interesting thing about the seats, which would normally have been raised up, is that several of them still survive, and they are carved with symbolic signs representative of the university and Scotland. So here, for instance, we've got the Thistle of Scotland, which is very appropriate. This is a very nice one. This is the Thistle Leaves of Scotland and the Tudor Rose, and that symbolises the marriage that Bishop Elphinston had brokered between James IV and Margaret Tudor. So you've got Scotland and England together in one seat here. And on this one, you've definitely got the King of Scotland. This is King's Chapel, and this is the King's crown, and then the X of the Saltire Cross of St Andrews. So that's tying in the king with religion.
There's one particular carving under the seat which is quite significant of the time.
Yes, a lot of the seats have been destroyed, they probably rotted, they fell apart and have been replaced. And one would expect this seat to have been deliberately removed at the Reformation because it's got the letters IHS, which is the name of Jesus. And the name of Jesus was a cult worship before the Reformation, where not just Jesus himself was worshipped, but the name of Jesus, the very letters, were considered holy. And I'd like to think that at the time when they came in here and removed the statues of the Virgin Mary and took away all the other signs of Catholic worship, that some old conservative just sat down on this seat and let the reformers walk by and not let anyone see what was underneath it.
It was precisely this kind of abstract worship that would bring the great music we've heard so far into conflict with those wanting a simpler religion. Not long after these intricate stalls were commissioned, James IV, the king they pay homage to, was killed at the Battle of Flodden and was succeeded by his son James V. Within the new king's lifetime, music would stop being the international language of devotion and fall foul of the Reformation. Scotland mourned the passing of one king and celebrated the ascension of another with the pomp and circumstance typical of the Stuart household. The choir sang this masterpiece by Robert Carver, Dum Sacrum Mysterium, at the coronation. James V was only 18 months old when he was crowned, and this piece reflects none of the religious turmoil that would eventually engulf the country. But what did Carver hope to express with this music, and what is it like to sing it?
After the disaster of Flodden, the death of James IV, the total despondency of the situation, it seems extraordinary that he should write so magnificent and uplifting a piece of music for the coronation of the infant king. And it's almost a symbol looking forward to great things for Scotland's future. Carver continually produces different ensembles from within the 10 parts, ensembles of soloists. So they're made up of different voices every time, and also some of these parts are extremely decorative, a lot of little flourishes within the vocal writing. So you don't lose concentration for a moment while you're singing it.
With this mass setting, the composition of Renaissance Scotland reached new heights, but the things Carver hoped for weren't to come. Many deemed ornate music like this to be the height of corruption, even self-indulgent, its holy words lost in complex melody. It seems that its very beauty would be its downfall. The Catholic Mass was about to face a devastating challenge. 10 years after this stunning arrangement was first heard, the writings of a German Protestant monk, Martin Luther, hit the shores of Scotland. They called for a move back to basics, rejecting worship that they felt put beauty before piety. As the establishment and the reformers began to vie for supremacy, the self-confidence of music like Carver's began to falter, and no wonder. The first warning shots were fired in 1528, when a young priest and composer called Patrick Hamilton, a follower of Luther, preached that salvation came through faith and by God's grace alone. It was a direct attack on the worship of idols, the reverence of relics, and the use of so-called decadent music. For the Catholic Church, such ideas undermined their long-held power, and Hamilton was tried for heresy and burned at the stake. So from that first Protestant martyrdom, roughly how long was it before the Protestant ideals finally settled here?
Well, it took about 32 years, and had it not been for the martyrdom of Patrick Hamilton, it may not have happened at all. It's said that the smoke from his burning, or the reek from his burning, infected everyone that it fell upon.
For 30 years, Scotland endured a period of martyrdom and reprisals. A succession of battles and sermons took place between reformers and the Catholic Church, with St Andrew's Castle centre stage. What happened here would define our nation and the future of our sacred song.
St Andrews was both the Oxbridge and the Canterbury of Scotland. It was the seat of the highest form of learning in the university here, and it was also the highest bishopric, and it was the Archbishopric of Scotland.
And a lot of the bloodiest battles, were they fought around here?
Well, there was quite a bit of bloodshed in St Andrews. In fact, the castle that we're standing in now is probably one of the most famous monuments in relation to the Scottish Reformation. And out in front of the castle in 1546, an individual named George Wishart was burned at the stake. What made this particularly gruesome is that the Archbishop of St. Andrews was standing in the window with some of his fellows and watched the event take place.
For years, composers didn't know which way to turn. All of them, members of the clergy, were in the throes of losing their religion and their paymaster. Their music also had a new rival in Protestant ballads, many of which were sung to rouse the reformers while smashing down Catholic works of art.
How significant a part did music play in this whole development of a Protestant stronghold?
It was fundamentally important. For the popular growth of Protestantism, songs and ballads were instrumental. And as early as 1543, the government of Scotland made proclamations against satirical ballads against the clergy, as well as songs that were termed odious. These songs tended to mock the clergy and put forward Protestant ideas.
Amidst the turmoil, beautiful music still emerged, notably from a St. Andrews Catholic composer called David Peebles. But his prospects looked uncertain.
The tide was definitely turning for Catholic music when David Peebles wrote Si quis diligit me, a reference to the book of John in the New Testament.
More restrained than any of Carver's settings, this four-part piece is the epitome of 16th century modernism. Written in 1530, it is an interpretation of Jesus' words, "He who loves me shall obey me, and my Father will build for him a house in heaven." But Peebles' pared-back style did nothing to appease those who wanted musical reform. Music like this should have been the future for our sacred compositions. But by 1560, Catholic masses were outlawed, and the music accompanying them was banned.
It's all very smooth and beautifully worked out. There isn't a note out of place. There isn't a note more than is absolutely required for the simple beauty of the four lines working together. So he's the coming man, and at the time of the Reformation, it's a bit of a tragedy, really, when he gets shut down.
Within Peebles' lifetime, the vision for a simplified form of worship was rolled out across Scotland when Protestantism became the prescribed faith. David Peebles was actually persuaded to work for the reformed regime, but what work he did achieve, simple harmonies for psalm tunes, had none of the medieval mystery or the beauty of the music that had gone before.
As someone who's partial to putting pen to manuscript myself, I just can't understand how this music could be deemed wrong and simply rejected. I sit on the fence with no particular religious affiliation, and I see the stifling and suppression of music like this nothing short of a tragedy. If these works had been nurtured and encouraged, imagine where our music could have gone.
In our next programme, we'll find out just exactly where our sacred music did go under the new Protestant belief system. But in the meantime, the final few bars of a piece of music that the Reformation silenced for almost 500 years.